A veteran visited a shelter hoping for peace. Instead, he found his missing military dog. After 7 years, the sky was overcast as James Walker pulled into the gravel parking lot of the county animal shelter, a low, aging building tucked between fields and old train tracks. On the edge of town, the air smelled faintly of rain and earth, and silence was broken only by the occasional bark echoing through the wind. James sat in his truck for several minutes before finally cutting the engine. He had not wanted to come to visit was his therapist's idea, another step in a long list of quiet efforts to reconnect with the world he had long since turned his back on since returning from Afghanistan. Nearly 7 years ago, James had lived alone on the outskirts of a small Texas town. The house was silent, the curtains usually drawn. He slept little nightmares clawed at him from the moment his head hit the pillow. Crowds unsettled him. Sudden noises sent his heart pounding. He avoided his family. The only voice he trusted anymore was his own, and even that felt foreign some days. Post-traumatic stress disorder was the name they gave it, but James only knew it as a shadow he could not outrun. He stepped out of the truck, hands deep in the pockets of his worn jacket, and approached the shelter entrance without looking up. The inside smelled like disinfectant and wet for a tired woman. At the front desk nodded as he entered. He gave a quick nod back, not saying much, and began walking the narrow corridor, lined with metal. Kennels. Dogs of all sizes barked or wagged or simply stared. James moved, slowly, pausing occasionally, but not connecting. He was just about to leave when he reached the last row, turned the corner, and stopped in the far left. Kennel lying still on a worn blanket was an older German shepherd. His coat was dull and patchy, his ribs faintly visible, but it was not his condition that made James freeze. It was his eyes, deep amber, intelligent, focused, the kind of eyes James had not seen in years. The dog did not bark. He did not move. He only stared at James, unblinking. A strange pressure built in James's chest. His breath caught. He took a step closer to the kennel, crouching slowly, not trusting himself to speak. The dog's ears twitched, his body tense, but still he did not move. Then James whispered, almost himself, "No, it can't be." The dog tilted his head slightly at the sound of his voice. James reached a hand toward the gate, trembling. "Cain," he said, barely audible. The dog stood slowly, his legs uncertain, and took 2 hesitant steps forward. There was a pause, thick with unspoken memory. Then the shepherd pressed his nose against the bars and let out the faintest whine. James dropped to his knees, a sob catching in his throat. "Cain, is it really you?" And then, without warning, the dog lifted his paw, placed it against the bars, and licked James's fingers the exact way Cain used it every time they completed a mission together years ago. On the other side of the world, James's vision blurred with tears. He pressed his forehead to the gate and let the silence say what words could not. He had come looking for peace. Instead, he had found his brother 7 years earlier in the scorching dust of southern Afghanistan. Sergeant James Walker had met Cain for the first time. The German shepherd was lean, sharp-eyed, and all muscle and instinct, trained to detect explosives. Cain had already served 2 tours before, being assigned to James's unit from the moment their boots and paws hit the same ground. Something clicked between them. It was not just a working relationship. It was trust forged in heat and sand and the hum of danger. Cain was more than a dog. He was a soldier, quiet, alert, always 2 steps ahead. He could detect a pressure plate buried 6 and beneath the dirt before any man in the unit could spot a thing. He saved them time and again, but there was one day James would never forget. It was mid-mission on a remote mountain past their convoy, crawling along a route riddled with improvised explosive device threats. The valley was silent, too silent, and James felt that old twinge of dread in his gut. Cain, walking ahead with his usual precision, stopped dead in his tracks, his body stiffened. He looked back at James, then bolted to his side just as an explosion tore through the earth behind. Then the shock wave threw James off his feet. Debris rained down around them. When the dust cleared, Cain was lying over him, his body covering James's chest. Heaving, the blast had gone off just seconds after Cain had moved. If he had not acted when he did, James would have taken the full force. Cain had saved his life without question. From that day forward, they were inseparable. James talked to Cain more than any human in the unit. He told him about his family, his fears, his dreams of going home. Cain would listen in silence occasionally, nudging his hand or laying his head in his lap in a war zone full of uncertainty and noise. Cain was James's only constant, but war has a way of taking even the things you hold most dear. One night under a blood-red sky, their outpost was ambushed. Gunfire erupted, chaos unfolded. James was hit in the leg, the impact sending him crashing to the ground. Medics pulled him out as the perimeter fell in the scramble. He called out for Cain, but there was no answer, no bark, no sign of the shepherd who had never left his side. He screamed his name as he was lifted into the helicopter. Cain, Cain, but the desert swallowed the sound. They searched days, turned into weeks, but Cain never returned back home. James carried that loss like a scar beneath his uniform. He blamed himself if he had stayed conscious. If he had waited another minute, maybe he could have brought him home. But war does not grant farewells. It only leaves silence. Now crouching in front of the kennel at the shelter, James stared at the dog whose eyes mirrored every memory he had tried so hard to bury. Cain, he whispered again, voice cracking. The shepherd trembled one step forward, then another. Then he reached the gate, leaned close and pressed his nose between the bars, and finally slowly he lifted one paw and rested against James's hand the same way he always had. After every mission, James collapsed to his knees, his breath stole in his heart, pounding. 7 years of guilt, grief, and silence, all undone with one simple, familiar tut. It was him. It was Cain. The shelter staff confirmed what James had already suspected. The dog had no microchip, no tag, no official record. He had been found months earlier wandering along the outskirts of a neighboring county, malnourished and limping with scars both fresh and old. They had nursed him back to health as best they could, but the dog remained withdrawn, uninterested in most human interaction. He was older, slower, and kept himself until James walked, and there was no doubt in James' mind. He filled out the adoption papers the same day. Cain, he refused to call him anything else, rode home in the passenger seat of James's truck, resting his head quietly on the door. James kept glancing over, almost disbelieving this was real after all these years, after all the nightmares. Cain was here beside him again. The first few days were quiet. Cain mostly slept, curled up on an old blanket near the sliding glass door, eyes barely open, ears only slightly twitching at passing noise. As he ate sparingly, moved slowly. James did not press him. He gave him space, just like he had when they first met all those years ago in the desert. On the fourth night, something shifted. James, half asleep on the couch after another long bout of insomnia, stirred at the sound of claws gently tapping the floor. Cain walked over, stood in front of him for a long moment, then placed his head gently on James's chest and sighed. That night, for the first time in years, James slept through until morning each day. After that, Cain grew a little more alive. He began to wag his tail when James entered the room. He perked up at the sound of his name. He followed James from room to room, resting nearby, just like he used to. They began taking short walks in the early evening when the town was quiet and the shadows long. James spoke softly as they walked, sharing thoughts he had never said out loud. Cain listened. Always it was not the same as before. Neither of them were. They both carried years of wounds, of absence and pain, but there was something steady in the rhythm of their reunion. They were no longer soldier and service dog. They were survivors navigating life together with quiet resilience. Then came the morning that sealed the truth in Jamie's heart forever. He was stepping out the back door, coffee in hand, distracted by his phone. Cain, who had been lying in the sun nearby, suddenly leapt to his feet and barked, loud, urgent, a tone James had not heard since Afghanistan. Startled, James paused, just as Cain rushed forward, placing himself in front of the path. Seconds later, a heavy crack split the air. A large limb from the old oak tree came crashing down, landing with a violent thud exactly where James had been about to step. Leaves and bark exploded across the yard. James stood frozen, heart pounding. Cain turned, circled him, and then sat calmly by his side as if nothing had happened. James looked down, then knelt and wrapped his arms around the shepherd's thick neck. "You're still watching over me," he whispered, voice shaking. "After everything, you're still protecting me." Cain rested his chin on James's shoulder. There was no need for words. They had found each other again, not just in body but in spirit, and in doing so they had begun to heal. The months that followed were filled with small moments, walks beneath golden leaves, slow mornings with warm coffee, and soft jazz afternoons spent on the porch watching clouds roll by. Cain had grown slower, his spirit more deliberate, but his spirit remained strong. James, now visibly more at peace, made every day count. Then came the vet visit. It was supposed to be a routine checkup, just another way for James to make sure his best friend was okay, but the look on the veterinarian's face shifted mid-exam. After a series of tests, the results came back. Cain had developed a tumor on his adrenal gland. The doctor called it adrenocortical carcinoma. It was advanced, aggressive. There was no cure. James sat in stunned silence as the vet gently explained the prognosis. Cain might have a few months left, maybe more, maybe less. Pain would come eventually, but for now Cain seemed comfortable. Still, the weight of it crushed James. He had just gotten him back 7 years of wondering, of hoping, and now time was slipping away again. That night, James sat beside Cain on the living room floor, stroking his fur in silence. "I'm not going to waste a second," he murmured. "Not this time." From that day forward, every moment became sacred. James took Cain to the river where they used to run drills. They visited the quiet trails in the national park. Cain got steak dinners, warm blankets, and endless belly rubs. Strangers in town came to know the quiet man and his loyal old dog. James even started smiling again. Then winter came, with snow falling silently outside. James fell asleep early on the couch. The old space heater in his room, a dusty, outdated model, had been left running as the temperature dropped. The wiring overheated, sparks jumped, smoke began to fill the hallway, silent and deadly. Down the hall, Cain stirred. He sniffed the air. Once, then again, he stood, ears pricked, legs trembling from age, but heart locked. On instinct, the smoke grew thicker. Without hesitation, Cain padded down the hall, barking sharply. He clawed at the bedroom door. When that did not work, he pushed it open with his shoulder and rushed inside. James was still asleep, coughing slightly in his dreams. Cain leapt onto the bed, pawed at him, barked again. When James did not move, Cain bit the edge of the blanket and yanked. The sudden motion jolted James awake, his lungs burning. As he sat up in a panic, he saw the smoke, black thick, curling under the door. Adrenaline kicked in. James grabbed Cain, threw open the window, and stumbled out into the freezing night. He landed hard in the snow with Cain beside him, both coughing, shaking behind them. Fire flared up from the wall socket, flames licking at the drapes. James wrapped his arms around Cain as sirens wailed in the distance. He buried his face in the shepherd's neck, his voice breaking with raw emotion. "You saved me." Again, he whispered, but this time it wasn't from war, it was from everything I've been running from myself. Cain leaned against him, silent and warm in the cold, even as his days grew shorter. Cain had done what he was born to do: protect, love, serve, and in the quiet snowfall of that winter night, James knew that Cain had given him far more than One more chance at life he had given him. Purpose a month after the fire Cain's. Strength began to fade, his steps grew. Slower his breath, more labored he know. Longer followed James from room to room, but instead rested in his favorite spot, by the back door, soaking in the sunlight. When it came, James never left his side. He spoke to him often, not with grief, but with gratitude. There were no more regrets between them, only love and a silent understanding that their time was nearing its end. One quiet afternoon, as snow flurried softly outside, Cain lay on a blanket in the living room, his head resting gently on James's leg. James stroked his fur with slow, steady hands, whispering, "It's okay, buddy, you can rest. Now you've done enough, more than enough." Cain let out one final breath, warm and peaceful, and closed his eyes. For the last time, James didn't cry right away. He sat still, hand resting on the place where Cain's chest had risen and fallen for so many years. There was no pain in Cain's face, only calm, only peace, and that gave James the strength to say goodbye. In the days that followed, James organized a small gathering at his home. Just a few close friends, neighbors, and fellow veterans. They shared stories, lit candles, and watched the sun dip behind the trees as they remembered the dog who had not only saved a soldier's life, but helped rebuild it. James framed a photo and hung it in the living room above the fireplace, and Cain sat tall, ears perked, wearing his old service vest. Eyes bright and watchful beneath the image were four simple words: Cain, always my brother. The story of Cain's journey quickly spread beyond the town. A local news piece turned into a national feature. Veterans Organization awarded Cain the posthumous title, Service Dog of Valor, honoring his years of bravery both in and out of uniform. People from around the country sent letters, drawings, flags, and photos of their own service dogs, inspired by Cain's legacy. But James did not let the story end there. He began volunteering at VA centers and veteran support groups, sharing what he had never spoken aloud before, not about war, but about healing, about pain, about how love and loyalty can save a man long after the battlefield has faded. Veterans who had shut down for years open up for the first time, their voices cracking with emotion as they connected with James' story, and in doing so, Cain's mission continued. One evening, as the sky burned orange and gold, James sat on the porch, a soft breeze rolling through the trees. In his hands he held Cain's old collar, worn, weathered, still faintly smelling of cedar and earth. He turned it over gently in his palm, then looked up at the sky. A smile spread slowly across his face, not of sorrow but of peace, because James knew Cain was still there. In every step he took forward, in every word he spoke to another lost soul, in every quiet breath that no longer trembled. Sometimes the ones we lose never truly leave us. They stay in our hearts, guiding us home. Thank you for being with us on this unforgettable journey of loyalty, healing, and the unbreakable bond between a veteran and his dog. Cain's story is more than just a reunion. It's a powerful reminder that love never forgets, and sometimes it returns when we need it the most. If this story moved your heart, imagine the many more waiting to be told. Subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories for more real life tales of courage, second chances, and the animals who forever change our lives. Don't forget to like, share, and comment. Let us know how Cain's journey touched you, because here at Amazing Paw Stories, we believe every paw print has a purpose, and every story has the power to heal. See you in the next story.